Ladies and gentlemen, dear family, friends, colleagues, distinguished colleagues, good evening. Of course, I am happy, honored, grateful, but above all, I am deeply humbled to be here tonight with you to celebrate the 250th anniversary of Joseph Mallord William Turner's birth. This is thanks to the Color Group of Great Britain, whose president and members have decided to award me the Turner Medal. Heartfelt thanks, Vienne, Valérie, and all the members of the Color Group Great Britain. What have I done to deserve such honor? I have to pass 2 slides at the same time. The Turner Medal. It's a beautiful picture. What I have done, I've just tried to better understand how early humans, thousands of years ago, discovered how to color themselves and their clothes with the plants and animals around their environment. And when I started research on this path, I soon realized that there were many people all over the world who were sharing this interest and were keeping age-old traditions, maintaining them alive, and even trying to work at reviving the knowledge and know-how on natural dyes. It's difficult to pass all this together. Well, when I started, what has kept me going, getting more and more involved in this research throughout my long career, is that it gaps bridges. It's a type of quest which gaps bridges between civilizations or cultures and between traditions and the multiple possibilities of technical, economic, and social innovation it opens. Important to me also it does not only concern a combination of academic sciences, but it requires some understanding and also practice of the sourcing and production techniques associated with natural dyes. It was to acquire such practical knowledge that of textile and dyeing techniques that immediately after graduating in history and archaeology at the Sorbonne University in Paris, I started learning different textile crafts with craft mistresses, not misters, but masters, but mistresses, first in Ireland and then in Peru. Tribes which don't exist anymore. And when I came back in Europe, I settled in the mountains of Cévennes in the south of France. And I started experimenting with the resources of our rich natural environment, reproducing historical dyes, not only from published documents, but also unpublished manuscripts. There are still lots of them. And selling some of the results of my work and publishing others. And and this is when I first heard about and later joined a group of people which were to become lifelong friends. Some of them are here with us tonight, and some, unfortunately, have passed away, but we all think of them very much tonight. And they have been, the group has been progressing and becoming more and more numerous and inclusive all over the years. And later on, I think the publisher of the journal will also join us. The journal Dyes in History and Archaeology. Because it is amazing development of archaeology in the last 50 years, which has helped us understand how amazingly ancient the art of dyeing is. It gives some pride, I think, to all the people who are trying to revive it. And to illustrate this, how we can understand how they were working in these very, very early days and how they could master this art of dyeing, I chose an example of a site on which I was privileged to work. It's a Bronze Age site, one of the probably earliest sites where there are quite a few textiles. It's right in the middle of the Taklamakan Desert in Xinjiang, northwest of China. And it's a burial site, so the tombs are tombs of people who were buried with their best clothes and ornaments on, and we were preserved, mummified by the dryness and the coldness of the climate. And their adornments and clothes are incredible with this very rich reds. All the textiles are sheep wool, and the sheep at that time, the fleece of the sheep had not developed so much, so most of the wool is pigmented from beige to very dark brown, but they had already started selecting sheep for the white fleece. And why the white fleece? Because of course, white is beautiful, but also it's because of the white wool that you can get the most brilliant and brightest colors. So we were faced with this wonderful civilization of the red thread. And I show this instance because it's such a collaborative, interactive, cross-disciplinary research. You know, we couldn't do anything. See this red, where do they come from? And then we had to use a preliminary chemical analysis of some threads I brought back, which showed us that among all the possible red sources, we had to look for madder type plant. And so the next step in this type of research is to go on botanical and ethnobotanical research, investigations. And preferably, in that case, I started with southern margins of the Taklamakan Desert. In the desert, you can't find anything. So you have to try and understand where they were getting their sources of dyes from. And along these southern margins, there's a series of oases where some people still remember. It doesn't exist any longer. They don't practice, but they still remember their grandparents dyeing red with this or that plant. And I was lucky to find this person on the right who showed me where you could still find the plant they were using, which turned out to be a variety or strain of Diosmada, Rubia tinctorum. But the preliminary analysis of Vitel-Novick had shown that the reds of the ancient civilization didn't correspond exactly with what you obtain now with the Diosmada. The amount of alizarin, the main component, was far higher than what we know for any plant now. So the next part is to look for other plants in the madder type or bed straws. And it turns out that in Xinjiang, on the other side of the Taklamakan Desert, you find quite a few other species. So you have to go and collect them. And then also the reds were so bright that we were thinking of the fact that they must have used a mordant, and there are some mineral mordants, ores or mines in Xinjiang, but I thought they may also have used, they may also have used plant mordants like club moss, which are quite common in either side of the Taklamakan Desert. The next step then is experimental archaeology, because with all these sources of mordant and red dye plants, how could they have them use them? So you have to make as many dye experiments and samples to see if you get near the results of the dye analysis. And that's the last part of the research, and a critical one. Thanks to all the amazing advances in the technical, analytical techniques which have been made largely through the existence of the color group and the DHA group, and this collaboration of friends in different countries, it became a little clearer that we had probably two sources. In any case, there were two types of reds with different proportions of alizarin, and also which were differentiated by the presence or absence of one of the minor components of matter, mangistine, which so the explanations can be either that they were using effectively two different plants to obtain different shades or nuances of reds, to obtain different color effects, which is already very interesting in itself. Or another possibility, which is even more amazing, is that they were already able to manipulate or to deal with their mordant and dye sources, the length of time of the bath, or all kinds of tricks that we don't know to obtain these different compositions in the end. Yes. And they were able to obtain the type of proportions of dyes they wanted, although they didn't know chemistry, of course, which gives you an amazing, stunning vision, I think, of the empirical knowledge of this prehistoric civilization, which we always tend to underestimate, I think. The only thing is that as they have no written text, we don't know how they were doing it. And so we can hope that when we start having written sources, it will be a bit easier, but it's not really the case. Although people don't realize how early the first texts on dyeing are. And what is interesting is that this text is mostly from the Eastern Mediterranean countries or Middle Eastern countries. And what is striking is that the ones we know seem to be fascinated with purple and its imitation. And I could check that. It was very interesting. I could have a confirmation of this fascination, or purple mania, as Pliny the Elder was calling it, during my work on a series of fortresses in the eastern desert of Egypt. I don't have a pointer here, or maybe I can try. Several on the road. They are on caravan roads from Coptos, this part of the Nile Valley, and the Red Sea. So the first sites were along this road, Maximianon, Crocodilo. The other were along the longer road to Berenike, with Didumoy, Dios, Xeron Pelagos. And we also had a quarry site in the mountains, Domitiane, Kaini, Latomia. They are all published. And in these sites, we have an amazing number of textiles, about maybe 10 to 20% of the rubbish heaps, which are all outside these Roman fortresses, are full of textiles. I was very privileged in having a collaborator. I could have the help of Hero Granger Taylor for part of the sites and some years. And the sheer numbers of fragments we found give a kind of so-called statistic value to the discovery and to the use of colors among these people, kind of idea of the fashions in colors which were dominating. And in that slide, you can see that it completely confirms the text with this kind of obsession for purple in all its different shades, which could be obtained either with the true stuffs, like on the right, with this tunic with a purple clavus on a green ground, which has been depicted on several mummy portraits, which are contemporary of the sites. And on the left, you have a nearly identical combination of colors, which is imitation purple with indigo for the blue component of the color, but interestingly with madder. And again, like in Xinjiang, they were able to manipulate their madder, because in Egypt there's only dyer's madder, to enhance the amount of the more purplish component of madder, which is purpurine. At that stage, and with the development in Europe of what I call the first industry in Europe and probably in the world, big industry, the development of the wool broadcloth production, we have more sources on the huge supply chain, which has to be developed to allow for this massive production, more text on dyeing techniques. And it is very interesting for our time because it's an example of what we can try to develop now. You know, we are at the sort of scale that we are not at the moment yet. So they are kind of example for us. Rescue archaeology has brought forth thousands of textiles, and contrary to what has been sometimes written by historians who are non-specialists or by people who are not familiar with the results of urban archaeology, nearly all the textiles which have been found in urban sites in Europe, in London, for instance, also along the Thames, are dyed. And so it gives you an idea of the scale at which dyeing had to be performed. And an interesting insight into this supply chain was provided by these 3 books you can see, who are part of the huge Salviati archive, which is preserved in Pisa to this day. And with a student, a PhD student who is now a young researcher, we studied these 3 books, and the results were very interesting from a quantitative point of view. I just give the example of the yellow dyes. You know, they are both coming from cultivation, like weld, and or they imply masses of people going to the countryside to collect the sowert, in that case, in the wild. And you see the amount of plant matter, the materials they could collect and buy each year, with probably the diversification of sources, because they had to find as much as they could, but also from a qualitative point of view, because you don't get exactly the same yellows and consequently not exactly the same greens with the 2 plants. At the same time, in the medieval ages, we start having really precise recipes, also contrary to what some historians have written, with volumes, quantities, length of time for the wood vat, how long you have to wait until the reduction happens, and so on. And to the point that we could, a friend of mine managed to reproduce the, the scale of wood blues of the medieval ages from the text I published and which I showed you on the former slide. And it's the only thing is that you can reproduce. You have beautiful blues, but we don't know what they are called or how they, if they exactly correspond to the names of blues you find, because you don't have the historical samples. And on the other hand, in the medieval ages, you have, I think I have put on the slide all the instances we have where you have a name of color with the color represented by a sample next to it. So in a way, we have to wait until the 18th century in Europe to have these amazing documents where we have everything we need. The name of the color, the sample to which corresponds, which represents this color, and a precise recipe. And we don't only have them only here in the south of France with these two instances, but you have also an amazing collection here in London with the Crutchley Archive preserved in Southwark, which I was happy to work on with Jenny Balfour-Paul, who is here, and with Jan McIntosh, who is here, and whose photos are on this slide. A fantastic collection where, again, you have the name of the color, the sample, the photo, the sample itself, and a precise recipe. The only problem with this collection of books is that the weights of the textiles are very, very seldom indicated because they had a very varied production. They were working for all kinds of people with textiles which were known by everybody. And so they were, they never mentioned the weight or the sometimes not length. So it's extremely difficult to, well, there are some rare, about 3 or 4 cases where you can calculate and reproduce as exactly as with the Languedocian dyes. Why, again, is it so important to publish these dyes books, which I have done in the last years? It's what I do most of the time, because they were working at scales which are really important and which can teach us a lot of things. I just give you the instance of one of the many regions of Europe who were producing wool broadcloths at massive scale. This is the south of France, and they were producing fine wool broadcloths in colors. The quality of the cloth, as the colors were specially designed to attract the market of the Eastern Mediterranean, of the Ottoman Empire. And they working at this type of scales, you see. More than 1,000 kilometers of fabric a year, with the implications of all the dyes. They had dye sources they had to buy, not only in Europe or locally, but all over the world, with the instance of cochineal. So it's really important to have all this precise data on the way they were managing this huge industry. What it ended up was with the most brutal break in the history of dyeing, because this interest in dyes, the economic and technical importance of dyeing at the time led to intensive chemical research into what were the colorants in these dyes, what was the molecule when they started speaking in terms of molecules, you know, Lavoisier, Berthollet, Chevreul, all these people were, and of course Perkin, and they were all obsessed with the idea of understanding how you could know the dyes and then improve them. And they so well improved them that they ended up by inventing some. And so in a way, it's a fascinating revolution for the human mind. It was exhilarating, I'm sure, but also it made color for everybody all over the world much cheaper, easier to create and to apply. And but we are now, and the question is this: is it still sustainable? We are all here citizens of the world. We all have the same questions for the future of our planet. And what can I do? What am I doing in that context? I think my lifelong career has led me to believe, maybe wrongly, that natural colorants can contribute to the development of a sustainable green economy, and to look for ways in which I could be useful in that prospect. So I started trying to gather together all the cross-disciplinary information which could be obtained at the moment, at that time, and publish them in English and French, because English is the most useful language in the world at the moment. And to collect them in a way where people could understand that chemistry is not something completely abstract or difficult to understand for people, but that it explains the colors and that it had to be understood, because natural colorants are so much more complex than synthetic colorants. Many components for one molecule. And so we have to take that into account after 1 century and 50 years of synthetic colorants completely prevailing. We have to remember that it's going to be more complex, and so more interesting, but also more difficult. And to organize this knowledge so that we understand that the different parts of the world have their own resources, that there's no competition between the resources, but there's a wealth, a richness of many colorant resources, which has to be tapped in this new way of considering the production and use of natural dyes. And this global approach, totally corresponded with the vision of UNESCO, of course, who had started organizing meetings of dyers, traditional dyers, continent by continent. And then they contacted me, and we started a series of international symposiums where all scientists and all dyers from all parts of the world would have opportunities to meet each other and discuss with each other and share their problems. One of them was in Madagascar, and that's why I got this medal, which made me very happy and humbled. And also it helped, this kind of discussions, periodical discussions, help to really focus on the main difficulties and the main ways ahead for the development of natural dyes. Of course, I'm not going to start producing them, but I must say there's a big development of the cultivation, both of the major historical dye plants and of new dye plants. What I could do and try to do was to encourage academic researches, master thesis and PhD thesis on traditional plants from different parts of the world, and also on the new sources of colorants which could be discovered, because in some parts of the world, the floras, the description of the plant is not finished yet, and we can still discover new resources. I concentrated on Africa because it's such a huge continent with such diverse possibilities, and lots of places which are very poorly known yet. And so I helped supervise the thesis, as I said, mainly on countries from Oceania and Africa, and more recently from Madagascar. And this is just an instance, Maeri, Andrea Manantena, was always evidently studying the traditional dyes and textiles and dye sources of his country, but it's also a huge island, you know, with amazing resources, very diverse environments. And in the process, he also discovered two really important and new dye plants like this one, Piadia, which dyes green directly, which is a very rare phenomenon in natural dyes, to have a direct green and fast also. So what I thought I should do also is contribute in my humble way to raise the public awareness about natural dyes and their huge potential. Even in this room, not everybody is familiar with natural dyes or wearing them daily, you know, and in other more general audiences or contexts, it just sounds, sometimes you feel you are a lunatic when you start talking about natural dyes. What's this? And when you say that you can be dressed with natural dyes, nobody believes it. So there's really a big work to do in that field. And also another thing is providing new sources of inspiration for young people, the upcoming generation. If you don't feel they are beautiful, if you don't feel that there's so much to invent and to innovate about them that you absolutely want to do it, it won't happen. You know, people are just bored. It won't work. So I try to reuse these dyers books in a more practical way, c'est-à-dire by publishing extracting all the useful data from these beautiful manuscripts. Oh là là, je suis en retard là. Voilà. By giving all the necessary information in a concentrated form. And there's a lot of information to be given, you know, hundreds of new colors for the people who want to try to make them. The real breakthrough in that research was the use of colorimetry, in which I was trained by my daughter, who is interested in colors through the dye woods. She works on wood science. And so I discovered we could use that very much with the hundreds of samples we had to study. So it consists of measuring each sample to have precise data and characterize its color. It's very simple. If you have a spectrophotometer, it's just an equipment which projects a calibrated ray of light in a calibrated diameter and transforms this light into the relevant information. Three coordinates for white and black, from 0 black to 100 white. And the other coordinates are from green to red and from blue to yellow, the way our human eye perceives the colors and combines the data and colors. And in that way, with these three data, you can situate exactly each shade or nuance. And you can share. I mean, it's not just to be convenient for researchers, it's also because in this way you can share your data. You can compare samples which are preserved on the other side of the world. You can compare this data with those you obtain from documents which don't mention the name of the color, they just show you the sample. And also the last but not least usefulness is that you can check that when you are reconstructing or reproducing a recipe, you get the right result. I give you visual example of all this. I chose this to show you that dyers from different countries That's amazing. And it's you have to do that, otherwise you can't really demonstrate it. You know, I plotted some of the reds of the Crutchley dyers with some of the reds of our Languedocian dyers, and look what happens is that the lower part of the slides shows that they had exactly the same idea of what a beautiful madder red must be. The line you see around 1 is the limit of perception of the human eye. So that means that these reds, all the reds which are below the line, you couldn't distinguish between them. And they are barely, the other ones, the two others, they are barely visible. And so it's not true for all colors. You know, of course, I chose a good example, but it gives an indication, a proof even, that not only they were, each of them, the English and the French and the German, if we manage to have documents from this, they managed to reproduce the color. You know, sometimes now people know so little about natural dyes, they say, oh, but we can't go back to natural dyes because they are not reproducible. You know, if I want to have another batch of the same color, it was possible, so it should be possible now if we try hard enough. So they were able to reproduce, and they also had the same vision of some colors, not all colors, but some of them. And as I was saying, you can now propose names or identifications for all these documents. We have just samples and nothing else. I'll show you, these are from Languedoc, but for those of you who would be interested, they are literally cubic meters of archives in the west of England, particularly in Chippenham, where you have books and books and books and books of dyers' families with hundreds or thousands of samples like that, and nothing else, just as they were producing them, they were sticking them on a page. So there's a lot of work to be done in England too. What we used is this colorimetric measurements first for was to in the field of reproducing historical colors, was to make sure that it was possible now to reproduce the blues they were making in the 18th century, because they were obtained from the wood and indigo biological vat, a vat which is obtained by bacterial fermentation. And to think of international applications of this type of research, we formed a group, international group, over the continents, and well, we tried to reproduce this scale of blues, the scale of blues of Antoine Janot's, and the end result is that we discovered with pleasure that it was possible to reproduce exactly at the level of perceptibility all the shades of this wood and indigo vat of the 18th century, with all the main plants in the world which have been known to be used on a historical or traditional basis. So on that basis, that showed that we would be able to reproduce the purples, which are obtained on a ground of blue, the greens, quite a few grays, and also browns, and of course all the fastest blacks. So the last part is just to show you that it's becoming to be a new source of inspiration for many people. In several universities or design schools are using these documents to study them with students, with experiments at reproducing the colors. In Segovia, we had a workshop last June, but they are working on this type of work on a regular basis. In Portugal, they are studying these colors from a scientific point of view, and Also, it has led to a kind of small-scale revival of the textile production in our area in Languedoc, with a reproduction of the substrate of the wool cloth itself, the broad wool cloth itself, and a whole team which is helping it to become something more industrial with colorant extracts, which are powders, soluble, which you can put in all the normal industrial equipment, contrary to the powders or ground natural dyes, rough natural dyes. And lastly, we have started a series of workshops where we reproduce all the categories of colors. Ancient dyers were grouping their colors in 5 different colors: blues, reds, yellows, fawns, and black. And these are based on a kind of chemical, technical basis. Of course, they didn't really explain it like that. But so we try to reproduce some of these many historical recipes and measure them with a spectrophotometer, of course, and see first if we get really exactly the same color, because there's a problem of, it also helps to think about the present problems, you know, volumes, the volumes connected with temperatures and the length of times when you must leave the dye in the sample in the bath, all kinds of problems you would never think of if you didn't really do the work. And the different results you get. So we have had 4 workshops now. I brought you the result of the first workshop, and we also do the fastness test, because that's another thing that we constantly hear, you know, oh, but natural dyes are not fast, you know, so we can't use them. But actually, as you can see, most of these recipes give results which are faster than a lot of synthetic dyes. Not all, but not all synthetic dyes and not all natural dyes, but on the whole, we have had the fastness test passed with 3 different techniques on the 4 workshops. And from the point of view of light fastness, the results are really interesting and encouraging. That's all. So I should conclude by saying that it is possible to think of development of natural dyes at a bigger scale, and that it's not only encouraging from scientific and even economical prospect, but from artistic points of view, you know, it's really something which is very stimulating and inspiring. Thank you.